I don't have a gavel tonight, but I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Cabarrus County Commissioners on October 29th, 2019, our joint meeting with the Cabarrus County Board of Education. And I will turn the microphone now over to the Chairman of the Board of Education to call her meeting to order.
And board members, I will call us to order for the joint meeting with the County Commissioners on October 29th. Thank you, Mr. Morris.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. We certainly appreciate you taking the time to be with us tonight. I think we've got 99.9% attendance. We had one person that could not be with us, but we know that all of you are extremely busy, and getting a meeting time together was challenging, but we appreciate everyone's cooperation and everyone that is here tonight. Part of the primary reason for our meeting tonight was just for all of us. We don't get to do this very often, and so when we can meet together and discuss information that's important to our community, I think it goes a long way in all of us getting the same information at the same time, being on the same page, and having a true understanding of the issues that we face and the educational needs in our community. I want to compliment everybody around the table because of the very productive relationship that exists between our county commission and our Board of Education. You know, as we talk to people all over the state, they are really impressed with the fact that we are able to work together, communicate with each other, try to come up with solutions to problems that work for both of us. And many people are surprised to understand that other communities don't enjoy the level of cooperation that we do. Now, that's not to say that there are not bumps in the road from time to time, but fortunately we're able to overcome those. And I think I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge the fact that we have excellent staff, both for the county and for the board, for the school system, and they set a great example for us in the way that we interact as elected officials. They communicate well with each other, they work together well, they provide information. And I think that also our elected boards deserve a lot of credit for that also, because if we did not encourage those relationships, then I don't think that would be as good as either. So kudos to everybody around the table. You know, I don't want to get too sappy about it, but I think we have a lot to be proud of, and I think we have accomplished a lot and will accomplish a lot in the future with these relationships. Fortunately, our program tonight is going to address some of those things, and I think that not only is that to benefit all of us as elected officials, but I think it's of great benefit to the public also, because we frequently are questioned by members of the public about why do you do this or why don't you do that. And sometimes I feel like they don't truly understand the roles and responsibilities of the individual boards. We are all elected by the citizens of Cabarrus County. School board members are elected to perform certain duties and have certain responsibilities. County commissioners, the same. And so I think that the mutual respect that exists between all of us in understanding those roles and following the will of the people that elected us to perform those duties has a lot to do with positive relationships that exist amongst all of us. So we've got a lot to celebrate, a lot to be proud of. This is being televised live on Channel 22, as well as the live stream on the Cabarrus County website. Like all of our meetings and all of your meetings, they will be available to the public on demand from the websites after this meeting, and very possibly could be rebroadcast at different times. So hopefully that gives the public a better understanding of what we're about and how we go about performing our duties. And so I'm going to turn the microphone now over to School Board Chairman Cindy Furtenbaugh, and she's going to kind of go over the agenda and get us rolling.
Thank you, Steve. I want to express my thanks again to everyone for being here. It was challenging indeed to find a date, but we finally got here. The agenda was developed by the county and the school board, so we did that kind of together, what we needed on the agenda, what would be beneficial. And I want to especially thank staff for creating all the presentations and delivering those tonight, because Steve and I aren't going to talk a whole lot. Staff is going to share information. I'm going to walk down through the agenda just briefly so that you all know if you might have a question, you might want to hold it for a different section perhaps. So we'll be starting off with Pam Dubois, who has come back from retirement for a moment or two here, and Kelly Klutz, our CFO for the school district. Presentation that they did in a panel format with the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners. They'll work through that. And as Steve mentioned about the roles of each board, there will be a little bit of the roles of each board, and hopefully from an educational standpoint, information education. Then we'll go down through the history of the teacher supplement increases, because that has been one of our greatest successes probably over the last 5 to 6 years. Increasing that for our key staff. Rodney Harris, our new Deputy County Manager, will be talking to us about debt service and the other needs of the county. Even though we'd like to be the only ticket in town, we're not. So the county needs to service other functions as well as the school system. So Rodney will give us that overview. Then we'll talk about the operating cost impacts of opening new schools, and we'll have Kelly and Susan both sharing some of that information. And then lastly, we'll walk through with Kelly, Brian Schultz, and Jonathan Marshall, the capital plan priorities, which our board voted on. You'll see that same chart is in the presentation, and talk about where the needs fit in, as well as the school maintenance needs. So we have a lot of information to cover. We're going to try to keep this to 2 hours. So I will be taking notes. I'm sure others, if you have questions, jot a note down if you don't get time to fit it in, but we're going to try to respect everyone's time tonight. So with that, we'll start with Pam and Kelly.
Good evening, everyone. So as Ms. Furtenbaugh said, in August, Pam, Lauren, and myself were asked to do a panel presentation at the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners. After that, it felt like the information was valuable to the participants, and so we were asked to duplicate that information here in this setting. In addition to that, we plan on doing the same meeting presentation at the North Carolina School Boards Association in November. So as we said, it was a panel presentation, so it's going to be, format is going to be a little bit different, but the idea is to deliver the content of the presentation. So we'll get started. And so this is just, thanks to all the kind words from Mr. Morris and Ms. Furtenbaugh, but this is a picture of teams working together and what we can do as we work together. So this is the groundbreaking for the new high school, West Cabarrus. And so this is the roles and responsibilities slide that we were talking about. I'll turn it back over to Ms. Furtenbaugh.
Okay, from the greater areas, I'll say the high-level areas of what the board is responsible for, we are basically the governors, the overseers. I'm sorry. The governors, the overseers of the LEA, the local school administration unit. We do have limitations as far as what we do. One of the things we do is we hire and oversee, supervise the superintendent, and that doesn't mean we're in his business every day, but we do give him feedback on things we're interested in. He informs us of situations, positive or negative, that we need to be informed of. We set the education policy. That's one of our common agenda items every meeting, is to review policies and approve changes that are required by law. We preserve the district's assets and manage the district budget. So while Kelly is our CFO, she brings all the budget adjustments to us, and many of the board members will participate in our annual budget development process for the next fiscal year. We inform the county commissioners of district needs, and that'll be part of our agenda tonight. And we determine redistricting, one of the things that is least favorite of the board members to do, but we are required to do that by law.
We'll go over to Mr. Morris for this slide.
Well, and I think this is pretty self-explanatory, but the roles and responsibilities of county commissioners, and I will point out up front, that is in regard to public education. And as we'll discuss later on with certainly with our financial presentation, our roles and responsibilities extend far beyond public education. So we have a lot of balls to juggle at the same time, but we are responsible for appropriating local operational funding. That is a myth that, particularly with the public, there are a lot of folks out there that might think that the state is responsible for that and provides all of that operational funding, and that is not true. We supplement that to a great degree. Without getting into a lot of detail about it, we're responsible for calling special school referendums. If there is an occasion that calls for that, that would be an act of the county commission. We appropriate funding for school construction, which is one of our big responsibilities and a large part of our budget on an annual basis. That is a blessing and a curse, both. A curse because we have to come up with the money, a blessing because we are a vibrant, healthy, growing county, which is not true of many counties in North Carolina. So we're fortunate in that regard. And then the final one is may initiate school mergers. That is not something that we have discussed in recent years and not something that we've been involved in, but should that occasion arise, that would be one of our responsibilities.
Thank you. So just a quick picture. Thank you. Just a quick picture. What do you think the three biggest challenges are for the other side? So as we make this presentation and as you're thinking forward, maybe if you want to think about three things that might be the challenge for the other side, right? So Board of Education, think of what might be challenges for the county. County, think of what might be challenges for the Board of Education. You don't have to report those out. Maybe jot those down and be thinking about those as we go. Okay, so now this is the first question that we came to in the panel discussion. I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Dubois.
So part of the panel discussion was talking about formal and informal agreements that counties and school districts have. So Cabarrus County, Kannapolis City Schools, and Cabarrus County Schools have a maintenance agreement. It was established in the 1990s when a lot of heavy construction needs were coming about. It was set up in 5-year increments, and that it had a termination with a 6-month notice prior to June 30th. That agreement is still in place today. It has been very successful. With Kannapolis City School being a smaller district, it has allowed Cabarrus County Schools to provide those services to Kannapolis City Schools through that arrangement. There was a minimum funding level for that agreement that was put in place of $11,345,534 that the county would not go below that funding level, and that was an 88.4% for Cabarrus County Schools and 11.6% for Kannapolis City Schools. Of course, evaluation of square footage can also cause increases in funding, so every time a new school facility is put into place, there'll be more maintenance that's required, so those increases would be taken care of during the budget process. The results of this agreement were efficiencies and economies for the maintenance programs between the two school districts, and it covered areas like buildings, interior, exterior, electrical, plumbing, HVAC, kitchen equipment, but it excludes janitorial services because that is an independent function within both school districts that they handle themselves. I think what's most successful between the school systems and the county is the informal agreements that we have. And that is during our budget process, and staff worked very hard on coming up with a method to fund during the budget, process, to make sure that certain areas never slipped backwards. The results of this agreement were efficiencies and economies for the maintenance programs between the two school districts, and it covered areas like buildings, interior, exterior, electrical, plumbing, HVAC, kitchen equipment, but it excludes janitorial services because that is an independent function within both school districts that they handle themselves. I think what's most successful between the school systems and the county is the informal agreements that we have. And that is during our budget process, and staff worked very hard on coming up with a method to fund during the budget process to make sure that certain areas never slipped backwards. So we had several different areas, and continuation being one of those. And having worked through many committees in the state level, nobody that I've ever spoke to understood the continuation process. They were like, "You do what?" And the continuation process is to make sure that when the next year comes about, the school district doesn't go backwards. And they don't go backwards because the utility bill went up. They don't go backwards because teacher salaries went up and they need to increase the supplement to keep it at the same percentage. So that was the biggest, I think, foundation that we had going through there. And as we worked through a lot of the construction projects, we came back to realize that there were certain other things that we needed to add to continuation, like instructional supplies needed to be increased as we get new students. Technology needed to be increased if we got a new teacher, or we got a new staff member, or we got a new student. Building and grounds maintenance based on square footage needed to be increased, and along with, like I mentioned, technology earlier. So expansion would be our next area, and unfortunately we have a great deal of difficulty getting to expansion once we get past continuation, except for the area of supplements, and that's where a supplemental increase would occur, like this past year when it went from 8% to 9%. The capital improvement plan was established for Cabarrus County Schools, Kannapolis City Schools, and Cabarrus County, and the community college. And the process comes together in the fall of every year, and the capital level of $100,000 or above is handled through that process for the county, for Kannapolis City Schools, and for the community college. However, Cabarrus County Schools is so large, their level is $500,000, or we would be spending, county and schools would be spending a great deal of time keeping up with that information. We have regular capital funding that's available for Cabarrus County Schools at $1,020,000, and that seems to handle the normal operations that go on throughout the year, furniture, fixtures, vehicles, and things like that. And the last big component area that we have worked on is deferred maintenance, and there is a substantial amount of deferred maintenance that is needed within both school districts. But 2 to 3 years ago, we started, and I know it sounds small, but we started with a level of $25,000 and below. And we came up with a little over almost $900,000 of funding reoccurring that established to eat away at those projects. And a lot of projects during the year that came in under budget were allowed them to do some more projects that were a little bit higher. But that's been a steady factor. But in order to get to the level of $500,000 and below, that funding needs to be around $4 million. And so we've got a ways to go to get there, but something has started to get that part in process. So I think those are the things that have been done between staff and the boards together to come up with a process of how to fund things, how to put them in classifications, and how to reach those goals.
Thank you. So the next question on the panel was, who are the individuals or the positions in the county that were involved in the working out the agreement and getting those in place and acceptable to everyone? And so on the county level, the county manager, the finance, and of course the Board of Commission. School level, superintendent, finance, and Board of Education. Obviously, those are the key individuals that were needed. The next question is going to go back to Pam.
Okay, so the biggest challenges of what happened during the development of these agreements, like I've talked about before, the biggest challenge is to bring two school districts together to set up a process. Kannapolis City Schools is substantially smaller than Cabarrus County Schools, but needs are similar but different in volume. And I think that was one of the biggest challenges. And for Kannapolis to kind of use Cabarrus County Schools like a vendor for a task that needed to get done. So they turn in a work ticket and that particular item gets processed. But some of the things that have improved since the early 1990s, there's annual meetings during the budget time as well as ongoing conversations throughout the year. The one thing I think we've all determined that it's an essential component of success is communication. And that communication is not only by phone and email, but face-to-face to keep each other informed of each other's needs. I think it's very essential to have those conversations. Referred back to the increased funding to combat deferred maintenance, which both school districts are facing for older facilities, along with combating new seats, new facilities, and expansion. But the communication must be ongoing. There are monthly meetings of the staff. There's chair and vice chair meetings. There's manager and superintendent meetings, and then the finance staff work back and forth with each other to maintain those conversations and keep each side informed of what the issues are amongst each other.
The next question is, what is the county or school board working relationship like now? And are there things that the boards would like to do with the agreement? And so we're going to talk a little bit about House Bill 1031, Lauren, I think, or Pam's going to start and Lauren's going to pick up.
Okay, so House Bill 1031 was put out in session law in 2018, where the Local Government Commission was asked to moderate a team of county employees and school district employees to come together to resolve a couple of issues. Those issues resolved around fund balance, capital, and dispute resolution. I was appointed to that committee in October of 2018, and we ran through the 1st of April. We were supposed to finish by March 30th, but they gave us a little bit more leeway. Throughout our conversations, we came to the realization that fund balance to set a percentage or an amount for every school district across the state was impossible. And the reasons for those things to be impossible are no different from a county. Depending on where you're located, if you're in the mountains, you're going to get snowstorms. If you're on the beach coastal areas, you're going to hit hurricanes. You have large school districts, you have small school districts, so setting a percentage is not necessarily the best way to do it, and setting an amount was not the best way to do it. We couldn't come up with anything substantial. The Local Government Commission sets guidelines for counties that they can't go below 8%. But if you were to look at all the data for counties, you will see a fluctuation between the size in the county and the percentage that they have, where Cabarrus County is recommended to be somewhere around 22%, but the county functions very well at 15%. And that has been a proven track record over the years. So we did not come up with a resolution on the fund balance. The capital and how it should be funded came into conversations, and there was a point in time where the county side was proposing not to increase the property tax by 2 cents over a 5-year period to meet capital needs, but that capital also came into dispute resolution, and the school side was adamant about not losing the ability to sue. There was no compromise in that area. They just felt like they had to be able to do that. And several of the representatives on the board have had various issues, and most of those dispute resolutions were around capital. It wasn't around current expense. It was in the area of capital. And I think what Cabarrus County did with establishing the CIP process and integrating the school systems let everybody come to the table at the same time, instead of the county doing their budget, making decisions, putting something together, and then March, the schools come up and say, oh, by the way, I need this, this, and this, which they have to have for buses or things like that to open the new school year. This integrates it all together so that a decision can be made. And one of the things that I was most proud of on being on the House Bill 1031 was I was able, and that's what got us to speak in Greensboro, as a matter of fact, I was able to bring a lot of information that Kelly provided with, for Cabarrus County Schools. I was able to bring their fund balance, how it was presented, what their categories were, why they needed the money they needed, talk about cash flow, talk about how we had chair, vice chair meetings, how we all came together. And through that process, most of the entities that were in that room never did any of those things. One thing we did come to was pushing that communication had to be an essential factor for a part of this resolving of this issue. But I think they're still working on trying to come up with something in regards to it. But I think that's the biggest key, is if you don't talk to each other, you don't understand each other's needs, if you're not transparent with each other and sharing what's going on with each other, And there's a lot of fear that if I'm going to hold this back and not tell you, because if I tell you, then you might do something with it. But the communication factor and how people get along and share information makes this county very successful in reaching the goals that they're reaching. So that was my participation in the House bill, and Lauren's going to take over and talk about some of the working relationships.
So, like Pam was saying, our communication is key in our relationship. And through her process, we really found out that there is such a big spectrum of relationships. So it goes pretty much from what's minimally statutorily required to constant contact like us. And I think we really set that groundwork for, that relationship and how we can keep in constant communication. So what we do is our quarterly chair, vice chair meetings, where we bring everybody together, our county participation in your school budget committee meetings, meetings throughout the year between chair and vice chair and finance. And here we are having this big joint meeting today. And other counties across the state are only doing maybe like a yearly working meeting. A couple of other counties, Catawba and Sampson County, they have monthly meetings with the manager, superintendent, and their community college. And then a lot of other counties, after hearing us speak, have been working on their relationships as well. So I'm sure that this meeting actually is going to be great for, helping them build their relationships. So to piggyback off of what Chairman Moore said.
So I'm just going to reiterate, I'm going to say some of the same things that Pam said and some of the same things that Lauren said, because it's really important, right? What contributes to our success is open and frequent communication. All of the meetings that we talked about. Transparency is huge. Our shared budget process, our budget committee meetings, all of those are a key to our success in this county. Okay. So that was all of the panel question discussions, but generally, or oftentimes what makes a presentation or a meeting successful are the questions that come out of that meeting. And so really at the end of the day, we talked a lot about fund balance at this meeting. And so, let's just talk about the elephant in the room, right? Let's talk about fund balance, right? So for schools, there is no legal requirement. There is no clear guidance on it. So our board, every time the audit is presented, our board says, what is the legal requirement? What is the recommendation? What should we have, right? And so the answer is this long, right? So if there's no legal requirement, there's no clear guidance, why do we need it, right? And so I want to talk with you about I put things in 3 buckets of why we need fund balance. Cash flows is the first one I'm going to talk about. We're going to talk about all the unknowns that we have, and then we're going to talk about no budget or delayed budget. So I'm sure that's foreign to everybody, right? So cash flows. Let's talk about our federal allotments first. Our federal fiscal year starts on October the 1st and September the 30th, ends on September the 30th. And you may be asking yourself, why does that matter? It matters because the funds don't come until October the 1st at the very, very earliest, okay? So DPI gets the funds, then the funds are processed and sent down to us. So the funds that we're talking about here, the primary federal pots of money, and so Cabarrus is one of the lowest federally funded percentages in the state. So other districts, this is a much bigger problem than it is for us, although it's a significant problem for us. So if funds don't come till October to DPI, and the state does not give us funds until, so I actually got my federal funds on Friday, okay, October 25th, I think that was. Now, that's pretty good, honestly. It's been November, it's been December when I've gotten my money, okay? So my federal funding for Cabarrus is about $13 million. So let's just make this easy and do easy math. So if I need $1 million a month in cash and I've got $13 million of federal funds, and I have elapsed 5 months before I get my money from DPI, how much money am I short? How much money do I need? I need $5 million. So I've got to have $5 million sitting there to make payroll, okay? These are my EC teachers. These are my Title I teachers, okay? So that's a really big reason. And so in that last bullet is the uncertainty of federal funds. Just like state funds, federal doesn't always pass a budget on time, right? So assuming there's an uncertainty there and that federal budget doesn't get passed the way that it needs to, then that could be longer. Switch over to local funds. Our local funds comes in installments of 1/12 allotment. So take the annual allotment, divide it by 12. That's not a problem for us when I have fund balance, okay? The summer spending for facilities and grounds, let's talk about that. So facilities and grounds in concept and in general is we're going to repair facilities. When's the best time to repair facilities? It's in the summer when the children aren't there and the teachers aren't there, right? We have much better access. So what that means is our expenses are elevated in the summer, and I have to have cash flow in the summer. So while I get 1/12 of an allotment, I'm spending significantly more than that. My burn rate is higher, okay? Same kind of thing for our annual premiums, so our insurances. Insurances are due on July 1, and I'm paying the entire year of expense, okay? Software premiums like Microsoft, all of those system licenses, they're generally due on July 1st. So I have a rapid cash flow going out on July 1st. And so I need cash for local funding too. Okay? So let's talk about state funding. I needed several slides for state funding. So why do we need it? We're still kind of on that same. So you have to understand allotments. Allotments are the process in which the state allocates funding to school districts. Allotments are awarded when the budget is adopted. Does anybody know when the budget's been adopted this year? Right. All right, exactly. So that means I don't have allotments yet at the end of October. Okay? Cash is drawn down within 3 days of the expenditure. That's how I get my money. I draw it down. Okay? And then cash is swept at the end of the month. So if I request $1 million, I spend $800,000, they're going to take that $200,000 from me automatically. They're just going to see that and pull it. If I spend $1.2 million, but I ask for $1 million, they're going to give me that $200,000. It's just an odd little process that, people that aren't in schools just aren't familiar with at all. Okay? If an allotment is not spent by June 30th, the funds are swept by the state. They're just gone. Okay? So our state funds are allotted and tracked according to their program report code. We often refer to them as a PRC. I call them pots of money. There are about 25 different pots for Cabarrus County Schools, and there are unique rules and regulations related to each pot of money. Okay? So let's talk about revisions. The state allotments are revised or adjusted many times during the year. In 2018, 2019, we received 54 revisions. So on average, our budget's adjusted 4.5 times per month just due to the state allotment process. Every adjustment to the state causes a ripple effect on our federal funds and our local funds. Common examples of those are charter schools, North Carolina virtual public schools, and transportation. Okay. Third bucket of money the third bucket of items that we need fund balance for are all of these unknowns. Okay, now that we kind of understand the state allotments. State allotments are awarded based on projections and estimates. In order for us to get the best teachers in our schools, we allocate teachers to schools in the spring based on those estimates. Okay? What happens if the estimates are wrong? And that happens, right? Especially in a growing district, where it's hard for the folks to put their finger on how fast we're going to grow. So this happens quite a bit. So if you grow less than 100 students beyond your projections, the state gives you no additional money or an allotment. Now, I still have class size requirements. I still have to meet the law of class size. So now this becomes a local expense. And so really what I'm doing is using fund balance to cover that, because the state's not going to give me that money till the next fiscal budget year. Okay? If you grow 100 students or more, the state will adjust your projections. That normally happens in a normal year. That happens in November. When there's no budget, there's no allotment, so there's no adjustment, right? So that's this year. We have no allotment, we have no adjustment. When there are 2 hurricanes in the state, like last year, adjustments didn't come to January or February, and that may be puzzling as to why. The reason they couldn't adjust us last year is because they couldn't get the average daily membership reported from all of those hurricane counties. So they were trying to go back to school, repair their buildings, do all of the things, and there was no way that they could report their student attendance because students weren't even in the building, right? So they couldn't do that, and until the state had all of the ADM, average daily membership, they couldn't adjust anyone. So we're looking at January, February before I got money for that, an adjustment for that. So again, same kind of thing is if you increase your enrollment past the 40th day, you just get no money. There's just nothing. So again, I still have to put teachers in the classroom. I still have class size requirements that I have to meet. So where does that money come from? And it really is the fund balance. And so if we didn't have fund balance, this district would have to make some really, really tough decisions. Okay. So because of all this movement, all the unknown, all the uncertainties, we have to monitor and move our staff every month to maximize our state funding. If we didn't do that, we would lose out on funding.
Yeah, and Kelly, if you just want to clarify, we're not physically moving them, we're moving them in the financial buckets.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's a great clarification. We are not physically moving staff. We are just moving their funding source so that it maximizes the money at the end of the day. And so just, more about the unknown is our constantly changing environment. So our turnover is lower than the state average, and I give kudos to our principals and our HR department for that. But just by sheer numbers, I mean, we have about 4,000 employees, so we have about less than 10%. We have about 400 transitions in the year. What happens in the transition? You lose a teacher, you replace a teacher. So we have 800 transitions or changes to the file every year. So that's on average 67 changes per month. And so every time we ask for a report or we report data, that changes. And so, sometimes it doesn't look consistent with what you reported last month. It's a little bit different. Well, it is, right? Because that teacher who was an A30 or a G30 was paid, $50,000 or what have you, and we may have replaced that with an A0 teacher who's a $35,000 teacher. It could have absolutely gone the other way, and that's happening 67 times a month, right? So it's not consistent. It changes all the time, and we have to constantly manage that. Okay. Sorry, I'm flipping my budgets. So the last bucket of money that we're going to talk about is not having a state budget or having a delayed state budget like we do right now. And so there is interim authority, and I told you before we don't have allotments, but we have cash, right? So the interim authority of the general statute allows the budget director to basically give us money or cash for the recurring expenditures from the state budget from the prior year. And the things that are in the middle that I've marked out are things that were not in the base budget, that we do not have authority to spend. So we had mental health grant last year. We do not have that this year. We don't have authority to spend, right? So I'm paying for those mental health positions out of my fund balance in hopes that the state is going to adopt a budget and I'm going to have funding to do that. I know enough about the budget now to believe that I have enough positions in 007 is what they gave me, is it's a different pot of money, that we'll lose the state health grant, but we won't lose those positions. But I don't necessarily know that on July 1. I mean, I've got to make a decision whether do I absorb those people into the classroom or do I continue those positions. That's a decision that we have to make. If I don't have fund balance, I can't make that decision. This district can't make that decision. Okay. You can see the salary bump for teacher experience. Teachers don't get a salary bump. The safety grant was more of equipment and staff development. Principal bonuses, they were supposed to be paid in October. That wasn't in the budget either. So our PET positions, our program enhancement positions were, which was good. Salary adjustments for the rest of our staff are not in there. And so one of the things I just took off of one of the PowerPoint presentations that the state did is that last statement that says planning allotments for districts serve as a proxy for the interim authority to operate, but they're not real funding, which is interesting, right? Okay. So when you have no state budget, so what can happen is you operate on the rules that you had last year. Okay, so July 1, I'm assuming that I have the same flexibility that I did last year. But things can change. In October, when they adopt a budget, they can certainly change that. And so an example of when that happened to us is when we had flexibility to take our teacher assistant pot of money, and you could have used that for something else, for teachers. So this district decided through attrition, if there was attrition, so if I had, 40 teacher assistants to leave over a period of time, rather than using that money for teacher assistants, because the state allowed us to, we used that funding for teachers. In one of the following years, the state decided you can't do that any longer. Well, school had already started. And so we had to make a decision as a district. So that happens pretty frequently where the rules change, right? And we have to make a decision. Non-reoccurring funds are not renewed. Just the example that I gave you before, the grant funds for those mental health positions, they may or may not be renewed, right? So they didn't renew that grant, but they did put something in on a different level to help me compensate for that. But it very well could have gone the other way. We never know, okay? And so this year it looks like we'll be notified in November of any changes that will happen to this year's budget. Okay? And that's all I had for this agenda item.
I think that to have benefit of being at that presentation that occurred at the State Association meeting, and then hearing some of the comments from the participants in the audience after they heard this was truly the most revealing part of it. And it was very surprising to hear the reactions of some of the county commissioners from other counties. Some of them thought it sounded preposterous that we would have that level of communication and discussion about those items. So that I think that's one of the things that sets us apart, and it was quite interesting to benefit from that. I think you're up next.
I'm up next. Okay, thank you. So our successes, as we've talked about, one of the biggest successes that we have is the increase in teacher supplements. And I just want to display where we were and where we are. So back in 2013-14, we were actually on a flat rate supplement at that time. So teachers had a schedule, and you looked at your years of experience, and there was a flat rate that we paid. And so just for consistency in this presentation, I wanted to convert that to a percentage. So that percentage would have been 5.81% back in 2013-14. And you can see now we're all the way at 2019-20 at 9%. And so the year that we made that change was 2016-2017. You can see where it went from 6.72 to from the odd percentages over to a flat, kind of more even percentage at 7.5. So we went 7.5, we went 7 3/4, 8, and then we made this great leap this year to 9%. Yes, and the state average, at the last time we pulled the data, was just 8 something with some numbers, but we should be right at the state average now.
So I just wanted to add, I think that chart by itself shows the amount of cooperation and communication that has occurred. Because when we started the budget a year ago for this current fiscal year, it was thought we probably wouldn't get a teacher supplement increase, but we worked with you all, so that was really our priority. We ended up doing a blended funding of it, partly from our fund balance, and the commissioners granted the other half. And now we just recently voted on, for the second year, a operating expense reduction that we'll be doing to fund the district's 0.5% of that increase.
Okay, so now we're, nope, I think we're at Rodney now, aren't we? Does he want, he wants clicker? I can bring it to you. I know.
So we're going to switch gears a little bit and move over to the capital discussion around our capital needs and debt. And I feel a little bit like a rain cloud that has to come in and deliver some unfortunate news, but I tend to find myself in those situations. So just to give you a roadmap of what we're going to cover in terms of the steps we're going to go through. So capital basics, some of that and most of that you probably will already know. That's just to make sure that we're all on the same page. We're going to go through a scenario around our capacity for new debt. And so that will be some figures, a lot of figures, and hopefully that will be clear. Then we'll talk about the needs and how those needs compare to our capacity. And then we'll finish up with a couple of notes around efforts we have going on at a staff level to hopefully increase our capacity in the future years. So that's where we're going to head. And I wanted to ask if we are open to questions or if we want to just receive information. So that's for the chairs.
I would say yes, we're open for questions.
Okay.
Just, we might have to limit it if it gets
That is fine.
too in-depth to stay within our
Yes.
time
So
frame.
I've got a couple of spots
You
where
good
I
with
will
that,
pause for
Cindy?
questions based on the content. And if you have any questions, we'll take them and then I'll keep going. Two things I did want to say at the outset is that you will see numbers in the presentation, and keep in mind that those numbers are subject to change. So that's one disclaimer. And then the second is, and this hopefully is obvious, is that our capacity, our revenue, is not sufficient to cover all of our needs. And so that shouldn't surprise anybody, but obviously that's the case. So with that, we will jump into some capital basics. And for the county, a capital project is anything that is $100,000 or more that has a useful life of 5 years or more. So that, in a nutshell, is what we consider a capital project. This can include land, equipment, but most often it's new construction or major renovations to facilities. So in terms of how we fund our capital needs, we have basically 3 pots of money that we can use. So current revenue, so our existing revenue from property tax, sales tax, et cetera, that we can put into these capital projects, and you'll often hear that referred to as PAYGO. The second is fund balance. So the county has a policy that if we have a fund balance in excess of 15%, that funding transfers to our capital reserve, or another reserve, but most often the capital reserve, and that is used for capital projects on an ongoing basis. And then the last is debt. And when we talk about debt, there's typically two types of debt, and one is bonds, and the other is installment financing. And if you purchase the car, you know what that is. You pay over a set term, pay that money back. So we did want to talk a little bit about bonds, and to make sure that there's an understanding of the two types that are most commonly used. So the first is general obligation bonds, and these are what are voter-approved debt. So these go to a referendum, voters vote on those, and if they vote in the affirmative, we can issue those general obligation bonds. Those typically have a lower interest rate because it is our board committing to raise taxes as necessary to pay those expenses. So that gets a more favorable interest rate because of that commitment. The second type, and the type we use more often here in the county, are limited obligation bonds. These do not require voter approval. They are typically higher interest rate than a general obligation bond, although not significantly higher. And they allow us some additional flexibility in terms of how we structure that debt. And one of the things I would point out here is the reason that general obligation bonds can be problematic is that if voters don't approve those, and that is a necessary expense, it is very hard for us to then go to the local government commission and request to do that project through another means of funding it. It's very hard to say the voters rejected it, but we still need to do it. And so that's one of the reasons that folks steer a little bit away from the general obligation bonds. And then the other point I would say is that regardless of whether we use a general obligation bond or a limited obligation bond, we have to have the money to pay for it. So it really doesn't matter which type we issue, we have to be able to afford it. And so that's a really important note there. So we talked about this briefly, is the local government commission is responsible for approving all of our debt. So any debt we want to issue, we have to go to the local government commission for approval. And they look at a number of factors, one of those being that the project itself is ready, we have contracts in hand to do that project. Another is that we have an investment grade credit rating. So our credit rating has to be sufficient to support that expense. And then the last one is that we have a reasonable debt burden and that it is affordable. And it's that one right there that I want to talk a little bit about in terms of some of the metrics comparing us to our peer counties. So this slide shows you three of the measures that they look at in terms of debt affordability. And it will show you that when we compare ourselves to our peer counties, and by peer county, it's any of those counties with a population between 100,000 and 250,000. So keep in mind that some of those are really not peers in a realistic sense, but they do, for the local government commission, consider them our peers. And you'll see that in terms of these metrics, we tend to fall towards the bottom, which means that we have more debt issued compared to our expenditures, compared to our budget, than most of those peers. So that is in our current state. And one of the things that we're fortunate to have is that our board and staff have done an excellent job of managing our financial position to ensure that these metrics haven't impacted our credit rating. So we're still able to issue debt, we're still able to get favorable interest rates despite those metrics. So before shifting gears, I wanted to talk a little bit about dedicated funding for school system capital projects. And there's basically three sales tax articles that are committed to school system capital projects. So Article 40, 30% of those collections go to the school system. It was about $3.2 million. Article 42, 60% goes to school capital, and that amounts to $7.4 million. And then Article 46 is about 100% going to school capital. That was a referendum done a few years ago, and that amounted to $8.8 million in FY19. So those total about $22 million of the $46 million of school system-related debt that we paid in FY19. So it covers almost half of the debt service. So that is a quick run-through of some, I'm sorry, and then the lottery distribution. Forgot the lottery. That remains relatively static. It's always subject to change, but that's a little under $2.4 million annually. So that is a quick run-through of some just general basics. Any questions on those?
I'd like to add, Rodney, that you noticed that we did increase the lottery proceeds from 2 million to just a little under 2.4 million.
Yeah.
So that the money that's laying at the North Carolina Lottery, we can put it to use now instead of waiting later.
So hearing none, we will move on to capacity. So as I said earlier, I want to start with some assumptions and disclaimers at the outset. So the figures you see are for illustration purposes only. The figures do not reflect any growth in the existing revenue. So existing revenue for debt, and that's property and sales tax, for this purpose, it's assumed that that would stay relatively flat. We know that's not the case, but just for this illustration, that's what's built in. They do not include any new revenue, as that decision would be made by our board, and so that is not factored in. We assume we're using standard debt methods and terms, so that means our debt would be issued for 20 years in a standard term. We are exploring alternatives to that, which we'll discuss later. So it assumes that we do the standard debt methods and terms. And then we're not refunding or refinancing any of our existing debt. So those are the assumptions that we're building this on. And obviously, it goes without saying that actual debt issuances, so because we're going to talk about some potential capacity, but any actual issuances would be determined by and are subject to the approval of the Board of Commissioners, obviously. So with that, I want to spend a couple minutes here just to make sure we're all on the same page in terms of what this depicts. So on the second row, you'll see a revenue line. And you'll see in FY21, that's $60,012,521. That number stays static from FY21 to FY25. It is set based on our known debt service commitments as of FY21. So that is the amount of money we need in FY21 to cover our commitments, including the new middle school and the courthouse. The expenditures line, the third row, is the amounts needed to fund existing debt in each of those years. So you'll see that that number decreases as each year passes. That's old debt falling off. And that old debt falling off creates capacity, which you see reflected in the available balance. So if you look at FY25, for example, if we didn't issue any new debt, we would have potentially $29 million of capacity for debt and capital expenditures. Does that make sense? Because each of these following slides will follow that model, so I want to make sure. Okay, so now we're going to walk through just a scenario of how this would play out. In FY22, that $2.8 million is equivalent of roughly $20 million of new debt that we could issue. The impact of that new debt would be the available balances would decrease in each subsequent year, as that would become a new annual commitment that we would have. So then these new figures would become our new normal. Our next available debt issuance in this scenario would be FY23, where you'll see an available balance of $4.9 million. So in this scenario, we could issue $50 million of additional debt. And then you can see the corresponding decrease in the available balance in every future year. So then, based on debt that is coming and going, our next available debt issuance would be in FY25, So you'll see there's not much capacity to issue any new debt in FY '24. So we're skipping a year. In FY '25, there would be capacity to issue $80 million of new debt. And you can see the corresponding impacts on the available balance. So this sort of summarizes the capacity discussion based on this scenario. So $20 million of new debt in FY '22, $50 million in FY '23, $80 million in FY '25. That's a total of $150 million would be the max capacity. And again, the issuance of that debt would be subject to the board's desires and approval. And the other thing is, as I said earlier, these figures are obviously subject to change.
The interest rates stay the same? Does that assume that the interest rate stays the same as else?
It is modeled based on current understanding of where the rates are and will be for issuing new debt.
So there is some estimate there.
Yeah. So now we can see the 150 million capacity, and so now we're going to talk through the needs and see how those sort of compare. So the first one that the Board of Education would be most familiar with is the Cabarrus County Schools capital needs. And so $381 million of the total $778 million in identified needs that we have across the county. There's an additional $247 million that's specific to county facilities, including our Active Living and Parks Department and our libraries. There's the significant expenditure related to the courthouse. There's Rowan Cabarrus Community College, and then there's also the Kannapolis City Schools expenses that add up to that $778 million in identified needs. It's also important to keep in mind that these figures are almost certainly on the low end, as there are needs that are currently being identified that will be part of the next budget cycle from a county perspective. So what we wanted to do is just take a couple minutes to walk through some of those county-specific projects, just so that you're aware of what those needs are. So the first two are headquarters. So the first is our Department of Human Services headquarters. This is a facility that is an old retail location. I'm not sure, did it used to be a Kmart? So it's an old Kmart that they currently occupy, built in 1969, I believe. And given the age and condition of that facility, there's going to be a need in the coming years to replace it. We are not yet sure if that will be a single facility or if that will be satellite locations throughout the county. Either way, that adds up to a project of almost $90 million. The second is the EMS headquarters, and again, that has been a location since 1978. And again, because of the condition of that facility and the age of that facility, there's a need for a new EMS headquarters. And they also want to change their service delivery model, and a new headquarters will enable that. So it is going to be dependent upon the site that is selected, what that cost would be. This $33 million figure is based on one site and one option, but there will likely be other options that are explored. From a park perspective, there's a number of projects that are on the list for upgrades and renovations. That includes Frank Lisk Park, Camp Spencer, Vietnam Veterans Park, and Rob Wallace Park. There's also need for a new senior center facility in southern Cabarrus County. So those, again, combined total almost $90 million of projects. And then there is a significant need for a library on the western part of the county. There is a current plan to have a library with a senior center. That is estimated to cost about $23 million, although we're also mindful that there is likely a need for a second location in that same part of the county, as well as growing needs in terms of the Harrisburg branch and the Mount Pleasant Library, where there's going to be some challenges there in terms of fitting that into our capital model. And then this slide touches on the courthouse, which again is a significant expense. It's similar to schools, state mandated. We have to cover this expense per state statute. The anticipated completion for the project is roughly January of 2023 for the first new building, And then there will be a renovation of the current courthouse that would be complete in late 2024. The total cost of this project is expected to be about $125 million, again, subject to change. And, yeah. So this slide here compares the capacity to the needs. And so we have, again, that $150 million based on this scenario. We have $778 million of identified needs, which leaves obviously a shortfall of over $600 million in projects that do not have potential funding identified. And so I wanted to close by talking about some of the internal efforts that we're taking to try to increase that capacity number. So the first is we've contracted with a financial advisor to help us develop a community investment fund. And this would separate out our debt service from our general fund. And this is consistent with what other counties do across the state and cities as well. This increases transparency for the public as it gives them a view of both the general operating budget and then a separate view of the debt service that goes along with that. But more importantly, it allows us to build capacity for future debt. So having the general fund contain that debt service in the earlier table where you saw the decrease in the available or the expense for debt service going down because old issuances were falling off. If you leave it in the general fund, what happens is those decreases get absorbed by your operating budget. So if it goes down $5 million, that $5 million gets put to an operating expense. In this new model, that $5 million would build a subsequent fund balance in the community investment fund. That would be allowed to build over time. And so we're able to invest more in capital projects through that model. The second is working on a debt affordability model, and this will help us with our long-range planning and also our ability to look at the project timing and to be able to know that if we stagger a project and we delay it by 1 year or 2 years, does that help us to afford it? And so this will help us to, in real time, better understand how we can time projects. And then the last is what we talked about earlier around the debt methods that we use. There are a number of methods that are used across the county with some exceptions from the Local Government Commission. One, which is a draw program, is a concept where you get essentially a line of credit. You get a line of credit that runs for 24 months. Instead of having to issue a bond for the full amount of a project at the outset, you're able to stagger that over 2 years. That builds more capacity internally to fund the expense. The second is longer-term debt issuances. This is something that we've talked to the Local Government Commission about, is if we are building a courthouse that is going to be with us for 50 or 60 years, does it make sense that we have to pay that back in 20? And so we've had peers across the state that have successfully got 30-year debt. And so that is one thing that we're looking at to reduce the annual expense of those expenditures. And with that, I can field any questions.
Rodney, I have a question. So you were talking about the longer-term debt issuances, so I'll start at the bottom and work up. But so for the courthouse, you said that they would have a long-term life. We build schools for a pretty long-term life. So most of our schools are built with probably a 50 to 60-year project life in them. So that would also be an option to look into if that is something that is feasible, I would believe. Of course, y'all will be doing the financing on that, so I mean, that would be something that you could put in your toolbox.
Yeah, it's something we've talked with the Local Government Commission about, and they are reluctant to do longer-term debt at the outset. And so I think from a school system perspective, because of the impacts that would have statewide, I think they would be very reluctant to allow anything beyond 20 years, whereas the courthouse, they're a little less frequent. And so we think it's an opportunity where they may allow us to do that. Yeah. Yeah.
Could you just review the community investment fund just a little bit more again? Because I seem to understand that you were trying to separate that from your general fund to kind of insulate you from the ebbs and flows of possible
Okay.
revenue movements.
Yeah.
And that the community investment fund would actually take the excess, or maybe not, depending on if it's a down year, it may not be in excess. Is that, did I understand that correctly?
That is essentially how it works. So in the years where the available revenue is less than the expense, you're able to cover that shortfall and vice versa. So that fund builds its own capacity, has its own fund balance outside of the general fund.
Rodney, is it fair to say that the Community Investment Fund obviously does not create any new money or additional revenue? It is more of a self-policing method
Yeah.
to help us do that.
What it does is it makes it harder to fill holes on the operating side,
Right.
but it dedicates revenue to capital.
So that means we're just going to have to deliberate a little longer and harder at budget time to accommodate those things,
Yeah.
which is a good thing.
Yeah.
And I certainly appreciate your comments about bonds. And I've said to most people in this room in the past, there is a perception out there in the public that bonds are just money that drops down from heaven. They say, well, if you need to do, well, why don't you just pass a bond? And I think that a lot of folks don't realize that a bond is just simply a loan, and we have to pay it back just like any other debt issuance. And I think you kind of touched on this a little bit, but the danger in, it's always good. We are elected to make these tough decisions. But when we have a bond referendum and the public can vote on it, I think that's a good thing. But when we have a bond referendum for school construction, and should the voters say no, then that puts us in the difficult position of saying, we can't pick up the phone and call and say, well, Ms. Jones, we don't have a school for your children, so they're going to have to be in the parking lot next year. We don't have that flexibility. So I think those are all things that we have to think about when we make those decisions.
And I did deliberately choose that graphic for you, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
The money falling out of the sky.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I think in the past too, is that there was a much larger benefit to the GO bonds, the bonds that would go for the vote versus the limited obligation bonds. That gap has narrowed very much, so that there is very little difference right now. And that may change over the years. It may spread back out as far as interest rates that are available, but for now, it still makes sense to move in that direction as well.
So I guess, Rodney, I appreciate the information. I think it's nice that we're trying to increase capacity, but we're saying your need is $778 million, and your capacity right now is only 150. All these things here, how much is that going to increase? It's not going to quadruple your capacity, is it?
No.
And what are you looking at?
You'd be talking about maybe a few $1 million.
A few million.
Yeah.
So we still have a huge gap in this county to fill these needs.
Yes.
And Rodney's model is also assuming no growth.
Yeah.
So
Right, but even with the growth, it's still,
Yeah, you're certainly not going to double that figure.
or triple it is what you need to do.
You're certainly not going to do that.
Well, and, yeah, there is a huge gap there. But as was mentioned, that does not account for growth, which is something that we are experiencing. It also, that is why we place such a significant focus on our economic development efforts, bringing in new industry, trying to build the tax base, which also increases that capacity and those available funds as well. And that's not always a real fast process. Sometimes when we recruit a significant addition to the tax base, particularly when there are incentives involved, it may take 4 or 5 years before we get the full benefit of that. But we are extremely aggressive in that regard, and I think have been very successful, and will be even more successful in the future. So we hope our focus, our goal is to improve that picture.
Again, it's nice to be in a growing county, but even that 778 number is not a stagnant number either. There are projects that will be added to that over the next couple of years.
Very true.
And that's not even the complete list.
Yes.
Again, there's others out. And that's why our commissioners have been advocating to our state legislators for the last several years to trying to find other alternative revenue solutions, ones that aren't going to hit necessarily directly on our local citizens, just as property tax does. You're not going to be able to, in the last 2 years, you've known the commissioners have agreed to increase 2 cents each year for the last 2 years, and we're still in the situation we are. And that's why we're advocating for those additional quarter-cent sales tax, and we've been trying, and that, you saw on there, the quarter-cent sales tax is about $8.6 million. We've been trying for 3 years, I believe, so that could have been potentially $24 to $25 million that we could have been
Which
using
is a
over
new
the
school,
last.
which is a new school for us.
Sure.
Correct.
Yeah, and so we've been trying to get that done, and at this time, the legislature doesn't feel that it's a worthy cause for us yet, or for other jurisdictions. So we're going to keep pushing, and we're going to keep looking for those other opportunities to search for revenue sources that don't necessarily put the 100% burden on our citizens, whereas the sales tax is people coming from all over the world spending money in Cabarrus County, and we can benefit from that too. So we're going to keep pushing. It doesn't look like it's going to make it again this year. That's what it sounds like from the discussions that are going on. So we may have to wait another year, but we're going to continue to keep pushing and requesting that. And it's not, and you know, the concerns of the state legislature is, you know, they don't want to, new taxes. So, but we're not asking them to propose that new taxes. We're asking them for the ability to vote locally on that quarter-cent sales tax. So hopefully we will continue to push and advocate on.
And I was saying, to build on, I want to keep moving here, so to build on what Rodney shared with the needs, Kelly is going to share with us the needs that aren't building a new school, but the needs year over year, and welcome, Susan. The needs we have year over year to fund what Pam was talking about at the beginning, the continuation and expansion money, when those new schools open or something changes as far as growth in the county. So, Kelly?
So, as Ms. Furtenbaugh said, we just wanted to display some of the costs associated with that are outside of capital, right, as you build school. Just want to start with the slide on the screen. This is locally paid positions. And so this is just information that the commissioners like to have every year, and the board. So I just tried to put it in an easy format for you to see. You can see we have 378 locally paid positions. So the bottom ones, the buildings, the grounds, the technology, those are more general statute type things that local is expected to pay for. But the ones up top, regular instruction, there's not a general statute that associates that expense. So we're fortunate that local dollars support these positions: teachers, administrators, clerical, custodial, assistant principals, and mental health positions. And so, but total 378 positions that are paid locally. Keeping in mind that we have about 4,000 positions total. So, you know, the percent is about 9.45% that's locally funded, and the others are state and federal. Okay. Unique positions, one per school. And so these positions are assigned to a school. There's one position regardless of the size of the school. So if I have a 400-student school or an 1,800 student school, I only have one principal, one school resource officer, one nurse, and all of those positions. And so that just that speaks to the ability to build bigger schools. I know that there's lots of discussion about what's best and what's not, but as far as money goes, we're talking about money, it is certainly more economical to have a larger school because of these unique positions, and that's operating costs. So those continue every year. Okay. Same kind of discussion here. So local operating costs, when we open a new school, we might spend $75 million for a high school. With all the components in the capital, we're also going to have expenses associated with opening that school. So you're going to have, I'm just going to go to the high school column, we're going to have utilities of somewhere around $350,000. And so tried to do ballparks here because you might open a high school, for 1,000 students, and this high school that we're building now is 1,850 students. So they could be, so I did a kind of a range or a ballpark. Staff, so those unique positions, various others, so locally paid positions, half of my clerical custodialist has to be paid local, and then certain positions are unique, and so that transfers over to local. When you build a new school, there's an impact of that. And so we're looking at about $1.8 million or nearly 1.9 for this. And then Pam reminded me the other day, and I forgot to include it, that we have recently put our technology expense out of capital and into operating, which is absolutely another one of those things that we cooperate with and we talk about. And so that was one of the things that we were getting ourselves in the hole every time we opened a new school. After 4 years or 5 years, we didn't have a funding plan to replace those expenditures. And so we were just digging our hole deeper. So by adding it into the local operating expense, that helps us. And so that number for all of the schools will increase. Well, more information, just school size matters. And so the high school ADM that we're building is 1,850 in ADM or capacity. The capital cost associated on a per pupil expenditure, that's what PPE means, is about $41,129. And so that's your construction cost, your land cost, your furniture and fixtures cost, the startup cost. All of those costs are in that number. So for each student, it costs $41,000 to build the high school. This middle school that we are planning, that we are working on right now, just about to issue the construction manager at risk, is $44,963. The elementary school that we costed out to replace Beverly Hills at 500 students would be $47,776. And then the current elementary school that we're doing, the Hickory Ridge Elementary capacity or ADM at 940, is a $36,934 per student expenditure. Okay. Again, on the operational side, and so this is total operating costs. This is not local. So this is state, federal, anything associated with running that school and operating that school. So I pulled a school that was about 1,000 ADM, and that generally costs us about $4,200 in operational expense on an annual basis to run. If you look at a school that's about 500 in capacity, that was about $5,300 to run that school. So again, you can see a significant decrease in the cost of operating the school when the school size is larger. And that was it for that agenda item.
Good job,
Susan.
Kelly, one question I had was the significant, you had a number for high school, then that middle school number went up, and then elementary went back down. Is there certain reasons you can assign to that, certain things that are required, or?
Yes, certainly. So the high school, you're looking at, the cost is obviously extensive, right? $75 million, but we're dividing that cost over a large number of students, 1,850. So, I mean, the cost of a high school is significantly more than you're not going to have all the fields and things at an elementary school and then less fields at the middle school. So you have more core capacity and more extra things at a high school that makes that expense. But when you divide it over 1,850 students, then it just brings it back down to a reasonable number. If we were building an 800 or 1,000 capacity high school, that number would be significantly higher.
So the higher middle school number was mainly attributed to the lower capacity of students.
And it's the newest quote, too. I think that has a
Yeah.
lot to do with it.
So, yeah, that's what the right. And so we
Right.
hope that quote or estimate will stay the same.
Right.
So I think the other thing to look at with middle and high school is you have a lot of extra facilities. So even at the middle school, you don't have a stadium, but you have ball fields that will be used. At the elementary schools, we're looking more at playgrounds.
Right.
And field day areas, not structured like a middle school or high school would have.
Yeah, and I think my question was just why the middle school was higher, and I think it was the
number
capacity
is capacity.
issue
It is.
there.
It is.
Can I make a remark real quick? When we built Royal Oaks, the commissioners were kind enough to give us a little seed money for a solar system, and they gave us $500,000 to put in a solar system. Kelly, can you tell us how much that system is helping us with expenses on energy? Do you remember what that was?
No, I do not remember that off the top
Okay.
of my head.
Because I was thinking,
Barry, I can help you with that. It's about $3,600 a month we're seeing right now.
okay.
in terms
As far
of-
as savings?
Yeah, it's somewhere in $3,000 to $3,600.
So is that
utilities.
a return on investment of 7 years, 10 years? Do we-
I think we're looking more at 16 to 20,
16 to
somewhere in
20.
that range, but that depends on the price of utilities.
So I guess the point is that when you're looking at a 60-year life of a project, those are things that, as we go forward in the future, we ought to continue to consider, because we are producing a commodity now that is inflation indexed. And as energy goes up, so will the savings on that system, and the payback will also increase as it goes as well. So again, things that we need to consider as we go forward with expenditures of money, being intelligent, and when you have long project lives, you don't have the opportunity on short ones, but on long ones, you do have an opportunity to actually reap the benefit where the taxpayer can see their way out of something, so.
Okay, and the next and actually last large agenda topic is about the Cabarrus County Schools capital plan priorities and estimated costs. Jonathan, I guess you'll be helping us with this, Kelly, but mainly Brian, you're going to present it?
Correct.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, and good evening to everyone. So really, we're talking about new construction, and that does include replacement construction as well. Thank you, Kelly. And I think this slide, and I think John, that Rodney probably said it best, that it's really, these are numbers that are subject to change. They reflect the current context of the situation, current estimates, market, and values based as best we know at this present time. So there are several things that we consider in prioritizing and developing our capital plan. So we look at the funding and largely depend and look to the county commissioners for that. There are some, federal, potential federal funding sources out there that we're traveling through the Senate and the House. We haven't heard a lot of updates on those at this present time. Same thing with the state. We just don't know. There were a couple different models proposed for state bonds or pay-as-you-go models, and those seem to be fizzling a little bit at this point in time. So we look to the local as we have done in the past here. Age of existing facilities, so within that we look at the safety and the accessibility pieces. School boundaries and feeder patterns, we consider that a priority, and also the growth projections. Where is the growth occurring in our county? Seems as of late here, it's growing in a lot of places. But more in particular in the northwest section of the county, and we'll get to that a little bit later. We also look at functionality. So what is the program purpose of the school? We have some unique schools, but then also looking at the elementary, middle, or high school level in terms of the functionality and how students and staff flow within and throughout the building. And then also school capacity, really looking at gaining seats throughout the county as one of our major priorities in this development. And then lastly, looking at the land availability. Jonathan has been fantastic to work with on that and is currently working on one of those land banking projects as well. So I appreciate his support and help throughout that process. And then also, what do we believe? So we have our priorities, and that goes into the development, and then also what do we believe? So our beliefs really in this plan that you'll see is the prioritization of replacing two aging downtown Concord schools, specifically Coltrane Webb and R. Brown McAllister. Those facilities range in approximately 70 to 90 years old, some of the sections of Coltrane Webb. were built in the 30s. So definitely those are aging facilities that need to be upgraded to meet the needs of our students. And then the second, in terms of beliefs, looking at the prioritization of that northwest section of Cabarrus County due to the rapid growth out there. You just, take a week off in between driving out there and you'll see some sort of new construction every time that you hop in the car and go look out there. And then lastly, the addition of Beverly Hills Elementary to the capital plans. We voted on that recently and added that to the capital plan. So those are our beliefs that went into this development, as well as the priorities in the previous slide. And then our goals, and largely pretty generic goals, but very impactful as well. So we're meeting the needs of students and the families in the development of Cabarrus County, and then providing the county commissioners our prioritized list based on sequence, not necessarily date, as a prioritized list of our capital projects for seeking funds for those projects to meet those needs. So those projects that we believe meet those priorities and then our goals and beliefs, you'll see them come in here. That's a new feeder middle school for J.M. Robinson High School. We touched on that already tonight. And again, these are just estimates that are current context. So that is currently scheduled to go. Kelly mentioned that we're looking at hiring a CM at risk for that project, and we'll have that recommendation going to the board next week. The new R. Brown McAllister Elementary School, and I was over there just this morning, and so it was, anytime you step foot in there, you realize, we're going to have to do something fairly soon there. And then looking at Coltrane Webb Elementary, the potential land, if it's available, would allow us to do some things at the same time as R. Brown. If we're not able to do that, we'll have to construct the new Coltrane Webb Elementary on site. That impacts a couple of things. One, where we'd move the Coltrane Webb students if we could not build it at the same time as R. Brown, and then also it would impact the capacity. If we have to replace it on site, it would be a smaller gain in net seats than it would if we were able to build it at a near off-site. Looking at new Opportunity School. So Opportunity School is part of the Glenn Center. Sometimes people just say it's the Glenn Center, but the Opportunity School is a standalone school. The replacement value of that would be about $5 million. And then there you see the new Beverly Hills Elementary that we added to that, and Kelly again referred to that in her presentation at 24 million and 500 seats. And then these three came in at the same time because they all connect. So we're proposing a new Northwest Cabarrus High School. We call it a new high school, but it's a replacement school for Northwest Cabarrus High School. And then that would domino into demolishing some of the what then would be the former Northwest Cabarrus High School, and then renovating portions of that to then move the current Northwest Cabarrus Middle School into that. And then that last bullet would be remodeling the current Northwest Cabarrus Middle School to create a Northwest Cabarrus Elementary School, again adding seats there as well. So those three projects kind of domino off of each other. And then looking at open a renovation of Mary Frances Wall. So if we're able to build a new R. Brown McAllister Elementary School on site, then we could remodel the former R. Brown McAllister and move Mary Frances Wall off of the current 601 site onto the current R. Brown McAllister facility. And then associated with that, we would have some options then to do some renovations at the current Mary Frances Wall Center for either central offices that are currently located at the Glenn Center, and potentially upfit that location or another location for an auxiliary satellite. That could be for maintenance services and or transportation services. We really need to be able to respond more quickly, often with transportation and or with our facilities. And being located in one central location doesn't always afford us to get from one side of the county to the other side of the county in a quick time. So an auxiliary satellite that would really probably hold some transportation bays and vehicles, buses, and then as well as some maintenance and facility services so that we could respond quickly to certain portions of the county. And then lastly, looking, way into the future, and again, this would be land banking, land for an additional high school that really served the southern part of Cabarrus County. It would serve as a replacement for Central Cabarrus High School. Okay, we'll go into a little more detail, but I do want to let you know that on October 14th, our being the Cabarrus County School Board voted on this final sequencing of those projects. So that's what you'll see next, and we'll add a little bit more detail to that. So priority number one is that new middle school that's well on its way to breaking ground here in the near future. And then number two priority is the R. Brown McAllister. So currently, R. Brown seats about 400 students. This would actually add 400 seats. We'd build a school for 800 students, and it would be constructed on site. So there'd be no additional, I'll just say that there is enough land there to build that on site, and the students that currently attend R. Brown would be able to stay in their current building until that is constructed. And then it would also, when it opens up, it would relieve Wolf Meadow Elementary as well as W.M. Irvin of the student capacity there. The third priority that the board voted on was the replacement for Northwest Cabarrus High School. Again, we touched on that, but that would be for an 1,800 student facility. That would add about 450 seats from what we currently have at the current Northwest Cabarrus High School. It would relieve Cox Mill High School, which desperately needs relief. It will get some next year when West Cabarrus High School opens, but will be at capacity, if not as soon as West Cabarrus opens, but shortly thereafter. And then it would expand options for Northwest Cabarrus Middle School and the Northwest Cabarrus Elementary School that I referred to earlier. Again, you see the Coltrane Webb, but they are fourth and fifth in priority. Again, if we're able to purchase land, that gives us a lot more options in terms of seat capacity. You could see if we have to build Coltrane Webb on site, it would be for a capacity of 650 students. If we could build it off site at a near location, we could build it another 800 student Coltrane Webb. Either way, it would help relieve Weddington Hills Elementary School. Weddington Hills is around 1,100 students at this point. It is over capacity. If you drive by there, you'll see two eight classroom modulars for a total of 16 classrooms in self-contained modulars, and you'll see a couple of additional modulars on top of that. So all you have to do is drive by and look at the back of Weddington Hills, and you will see that it is overcrowded and will need that relief very quickly. Priority 6 would be the Opportunity School. We'd model that off the current PLC that you all funded and built, and if you haven't seen that, I would encourage you to drive out. There's a great facility for about 150 students, which would meet the needs of the current Opportunity School, and we would look at building that on an existing property. We've been analyzing the acreage that we have with our current facility, so we wouldn't necessarily be asking for an additional land for that. We think we could fit that within one of our current property sites. Number 7 priority would be the renovation of that Mary Frances Wall. So that would be the students that once R. Brown is finished, then we'd have to decide whether we need that former R. Brown facility to move Coltrane Webb students into. And then once that was cleared of that, we could then remodel it and renovate it for the pre-K students at Mary Frances Wall. And then the 8th priority is the renovation of central services and auxiliary satellites. So again, this would be pulling the offices that are currently at the Glenn Center. So those offices are technology. Their Kids Plus is located there, accountability, and then our information systems, our Power School folks are there as well. So it would move those renovation of that site at current Mary Frances Wall for those county services and potentially the auxiliary services as well. Then we brought in the renovation of the Northwest Cabarrus Middle School and Northwest Cabarrus Elementary School. You can see that the middle school would add an additional 300 seats on top of what the student capacity currently is at Northwest Cabarrus Middle School. the Northwest Cabarrus Elementary School would add 900 total seats to our elementary school capacity. The 11th priority would be Beverly Hills. It would add it would be a 500 student capacity facility and would add an additional 100 seats to what is currently at Beverly Hills. And then lastly, the 12th priority that you see is that land banking for a replacement for Central Cabarrus High School. So with that, I'd open it up to, well, and you do see the total is at about $291.5 million. That may make your $778 million go up a little bit, but would certainly open it up to any questions you have about that prioritized sequence that our board voted on a couple of weeks ago.
One question, Brian, about the central services and auxiliary satellites. Once that would be accomplished, does that free up that old Concord High School site or Concord Middle School, which had a number of different names, Glenn Center? So that would be, we would be able to put that back into private hands, back on the tax books, and for some possible preservation efforts, which I know is important to a lot of people in the community.
Yes, we understand that piece of property and that building itself is a very, very valuable to the community, and that would put it back in play. So, you know, at the current, what we call the Glenn Center, currently is the Opportunity School and the Central Services offices. Right. So we would, you know, this kind of phases it out with the Opportunity School being first, and then the Central Services offices would be second. You know, so we could consider lots of options there if we moved one out, and then there is some open space already
Right.
there. So absolutely, it frees up that space to then, you know, for lots of opportunities.
Right, great, thank you.
One thing I would like to state, it was a vote in October, but it was not a unanimous vote. I was out of the country at that time, and I do not agree with the number 11 placement. I really feel like that should be closer in, because that school is older, and I feel like it should be like number 8 because it is older, and we are getting number 5 and number 2. We're getting those extra seats. We're getting extra seats put in to get overcrowding for Coltrane Webb. I mean, for Weddington, and getting a lot of extra seats and a lot of the overcrowding in the western part of the county taken care of there. When we're doing Brown and we're doing Coltrane Webb, and when we talked about it, we were going to put Beverly Hills originally right after Coltrane Webb, and so it was not a unanimous vote when that was taken. And so I want to make sure the commissioners realize it was not a unanimous vote.
But we purposely didn't put a timeline on this.
Taken.
We purposely did not put a timeline on any of these
Well,
projects.
I know, but what I'm saying, you've got it set that way, but it was not a unanimous vote.
I'd like to ask Jonathan just to talk a little bit about how you work with our our district staff as far as the land banking and through the beginning of our construction stages and whatnot.
Okay. And I believe the other thing that I was going to talk about was priorities of the county. But yes, so we do not set priorities for finding school sites. That is set by the school board, and then in correspondence with the commissioners funding those sites. So we take all those site searches from your priorities. And you will see we've had some fits and starts as those may change. But at this point, of course, we're about to we have secured the middle school site and are about to close on it. We're very close to securing a high school site. But then as you set these priorities, that sets our then agenda for the ones that we go out and seek. And as you're aware, they're not making more land. There's a lot of people competing for land, particularly in those areas where you need schools. So we are competing against private development, and that cost continues to climb. And we have employed a private real estate firm to help us, because we do cold call on people. We go try to assemble land. We go to folks whose land is not on the market. And believe it or not, there are still some people out there who set a priority for themselves on helping the public and helping their community. And so there are people who are willing to talk to us about land that might not otherwise talk to a developer. But in terms of county priorities, and I, like everybody else, I'm going to start with a few qualifiers. The priorities are set by our board. They adopt the capital improvement plan with their budget. That said, many of the items I'm going to talk about or give as examples, and I'm not going to go through the exhaustive list, have been pushed back over the years. They're things that we know we need to do, but we just can't afford to do them, so they get pushed back. And there's many more items that we just simply list as a need, and it shows in the out years. We've not even set a schedule for those yet. They also, as many of the items we've talked about tonight, have an operating cost associated with them. So if we go to open a new library, we will be hiring new library staff, new senior center staff. So as we go through our priority list, we also factor in that there's an operating cost, not just a capital cost. And I won't get into some of the specific numbers. You'll see as Rodney was giving examples, and some of these are going to be items that he used as examples in his presentation. Those numbers may differ because we're constantly looking at better and even less expensive ways to do it and phased ways to build these. So that said, our mandatory functions that I want to highlight, there where we have specific needs and we've identified them in that CIP, include our public safety communications. And we do that in correspondence with the other jurisdictions in this county as well as surrounding counties. And those are constant needs. And one of the things we've identified most recently is the need, based on calls being dropped and having calls that aren't understood correctly, are that we need a new public safety tower in the far northeastern part of the county. And again, we're seeking land for that, and we'll be constructing that. We have an emergency management public safety facility that has been pushed back constantly. But that is a facility that's intended to support all public safety, but in particular fire safety, which is volunteer fire departments and the public departments all using that together. And then as we talked about the EMS headquarters, and I don't know how many of you have been to Station 1. We call that a headquarters. Station 1 is an old house, a very small house that we use as a headquarters. We also use the 7th floor across the street at the sheriff's office. And that is a luxury we have now. We will not continue to have that luxury. As the sheriff's office expands, that was built as expansion space. So Rowan Cabarrus Community College is in there and has been in there, but has also had to seek other places to teach classes. And our EMS folks are in there, but will not be able to continue to stay there. We have non-mandatory functions that we're seeking, or we have plans for, and you've heard many of those at Rob Wallace Park, Frank List Park, Camp Spencer. Those you say, well, maybe building in a park isn't as important as building a new school or an EMS headquarters, but our chairman can give you examples, and I'm sure he'd be happy to, of examples of economic development projects that have specifically asked us about those type of quality of life issues, and we've lost some because of a lack of some quality of life issues. So those are very important both to the citizens who approach our commissioners and ask for those facilities like libraries and senior centers, but they're also important as we go out and recruit in economic development. In land, I will just touch on the human services. If we were to move out of that human services facility or use a satellite method to have other facilities, we will have to acquire land for additional human services facilities. In our own support, just like you have, years ago we were fortunate that we were finally able to build a new bus garage. And you remember how long we went with a very substandard bus garage before that excellent facility was built. Well, that's not quite where we are with our own infrastructure and asset management, but we have greatly outgrown our supports of facilities and have been leasing warehouse space just as you have. So we have been able to purchase an operations center, and we have a number of renovations and additions to that operations center that are necessary and are planned over the years. In particular, as our fleet grows, we need a new fleet maintenance facility. And then this building, it's a little hard to believe when you sit in this room, but in April we will have been in this building for 30 years. For 30 years our skylights have leaked. It doesn't sound like much, but we're going to be doing a major project to re-roof this building and modify the center of the building to fix that finally and fix the damage that's occurred over the years. And then we still have additional need. We have done about as much remodeling as we possibly can. I think Mike is tired of us coming to him with another office modification in one part of the building or another, but it's been necessary to keep finding new space for employees. And then the last thing I'll mention, and we've talked about this, and it's the most expensive, I wish it was still light out so we could look at the lovely parking lot across the street that soon will be a 4-story courthouse. We are required by the state to provide that space for them. We're required to do a lot of things for the courts, but there's no avoiding it. The one we're in is approaching 50 years itself, and we have reached a point not only do we need to build that new courthouse, but we need to renovate the existing one. And we're taking advantage of that and creating a block that becomes part of the larger redevelopment of downtown Concord. So we'll also have some public space, but that is a minor cost compared to what that courthouse itself will cost.
Well, I think we have gotten a lot of good information. Did you have something else, Brian?
Yeah, I just wanted to, we had one slide, and this really dovetails nicely into what Ms. Dubois was talking about earlier with some of the deferred maintenance and the capital improvement plans. And I'd just point to that, the very middle number there, for 1920, we identified about $92 million of projects over $500,000 in deferred maintenance. I wanted to connect that to what Ms. Dubois was talking about earlier. And those are things like, Jonathan, you sparked my memory on this, of roofs, largely roof projects, elementary, middle, and high schools, as well as HVAC systems. You'll see that those dot that list, and they're $4 million, $5 million a project on those things. So I did want to point that out and make that connection to earlier discussion.
Great. Well, I think you have provided a great segue into what I was about to say, that depending upon how you choose to look at the information we've received tonight, it could be extremely depressing. When you look at that debt capacity and you look at the needs, and then you talk about the deferred maintenance, and it all seems very overwhelming, which makes me think back to a number of years ago, and there are several members here tonight on both boards that were elected in 2012. And in those early meetings, what we talked about month after month after month was having the challenge of moving buckets around in the schools to catch the water from the leaking roofs, and those are the kind of reports that we got. And of course there was overwhelming deferred maintenance at that time too. So I think we've been diligent on both sides of the fence in working on those issues, and we don't hear those reports as frequently anymore. So we have made progress, and I think we're on the right track, and I think that sharing information like we have tonight helps us to get further down the road to solve some of those other needs. None of the decisions that we make are easy. I think that there's nobody in the room that would argue with that. And one of the slides that I think in Pam and Kelly's presentation and Lauren's was mentioned transparency. And that certainly has been a focus of our board over quite a few years, to be as transparent as possible, to provide more information to the public so that people gain a better understanding of the issues we deal with. I feel like the school system has done a good job at that as well. And just the kind of conversations that we've had here tonight really convey to the public, I think, and give them a better understanding of some of the challenges that we face in trying to prioritize these needs and make sure that we do the best job we can to cover all those things. My compliments again to everybody for being here. I think it's pretty remarkable that we're within 2 minutes of our time.
Our goal time.
That we had set as a goal, so that's pretty impressive. Is there any other questions or comments that need to be made before we adjourn?
I just want to talk about the next steps.
Absolutely.
So our CFO, Kelly Klutz, has set the dates for our budget meetings, and members of the county staff are already invited, I believe, or they will be. I'm not sure if the notices were sent out yet, but that will start. The commissioners, you will then invite us to give you our final list of priorities. Susan will work her magic and see where things can fit in. And then we'll get together throughout the fall and into the spring to talk more about budget priorities and whatnot, and see where, especially our capital requests, all fall out. Keeping in mind that we're opening 2 new schools in the next fiscal year. So,
Absolutely. I think this has been extremely valuable. I hope we don't wait quite so long to do it again. But with that being said, I would entertain a motion from one of the commissioners to adjourn this special joint meeting with the Cabarrus County Board of Education. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye. All opposed, no. We stand adjourned, and I turn the microphone over to the school board chairman.
I'll take a motion from the school board members to adjourn.
Second.
Mr. Shoemaker made the motion, Mr. Walter made the second. Any discussion?
I'd just like to make one comment.
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Burtonville, I hear that you have a birthday tomorrow.
Oh, my goodness.
And if I could, I would just like to wish you a very happy birthday.
Thank you, ma'am.
For you, so
Oh, my
after
goodness.
the meeting, we can give you a cupcake. So happy birthday.
Thank you. I made it to another one. Take a motion. We already have our motion or second. All in favor to adjourn, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion passes 6-0. Thank you and good night. Thank you all.